For Oberleutnant Klaus Richter of the 352nd Artillery Regiment, the morning on the Normandy coast began as any other. A thin, damp mist lay over the English Channel, dulling the world in a gray, muted stillness. The air was cold, heavy with a familiar scent of salt and wet earth. Just past 5 in the morning, another watch, another day of anxious waiting. Through his binoculars, as the first pale light of dawn brushed the horizon, the sea began to transform. It wasn't the tide. It wasn't the weather. Something impossible had appeared. A dark line formed where the water met the sky, spreading and sharpening, multiplying into shapes that no fleet could account for. This was not ships. It was a city of steel, a floating metropolis rising from the mist and stepping into history. In that moment, before any Allied soldier set foot on the beaches, before the names Omaha or Utah were even spoken, Richter realized the Reich was about to drown. To understand the shock of that morning, one must enter the mindset of Fortress Europe in the spring of 1944. From the coast of Norway to the Spanish border, German engineers had erected the Atlantic Wall, a chain of concrete and steel, bristling with guns, meant to be an impenetrable defense. To the high command and in the propaganda fed to the troops, it was proof of the Reich's might. Richter, a professional soldier and veteran of the Eastern Front, knew the difference between propaganda and reality. At 32, he was old enough to recall a Germany of another time and young enough to have been forged in the fires of war. He was pragmatic, observant, and profoundly weary. He commanded an artillery battery of solid, checkmated cannons, nestled in concrete casemates a few miles inland from the beaches that would soon be called Omaha. From his observation post, a concrete bunker sunk into a high bluff, he could survey the sea in its entirety. Day after day, he and his men drilled, calculated firing solutions, maintained their guns, and watched the gray emptiness. Conversation always returned to the invasion. D-Day, the day of days. When it would come and where, remained uncertain. German intelligence expected the main attack at the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest crossing. Normandy was considered only a diversion, not the main event. It was a massive miscalculation, a product of a brilliant Allied deception known as Operation Fortitude, leaving the Normandy defenders dangerously exposed. Richter's unit, part of the 352nd Infantry Division, was among the strongest locally, yet still only a shadow of the elite forces that had conquered France 4 years earlier. It consisted of seasoned veterans like Richter, supplemented by young conscripts and older reservists. They were courageous and dutiful, but not the stormtroopers of 1940. They were defenders tasked with holding an overstretched line. Even the Atlantic Wall was more patchwork than barrier. Many bunkers were unfinished. Minefields contained gaps. Distances meant that even a powerful strong point could be isolated or bypassed. Richter had seen the shortcuts local farmers still used and the blind spots in the firing lines. He approached their chances with professional skepticism. In the weeks before June, tension had been a tangible presence. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, charged with fortifying the coast, had ordered a whirlwind of work. Millions of mines, thousands of jagged steel obstacles. The men called them Rammel's asparagus, placed across the beaches. Rommel grasped the truth Berlin ignored. If the Allies weren't stopped on the first day, the war in the West would be lost. The first day alone mattered. But on June 5th, the weather shifted. A storm struck with high winds and rough seas. The German Meteorological Office declared an invasion impossible for days. Many officers relaxed. Rommel himself returned to Germany for his wife's birthday, confident the storm would protect the coast. So, as Richter stood watch in the pre-dawn chill of June 6th, the atmosphere felt routine. The storm had passed, but the sea remained rough. No one expected anything. He was looking east when he first noticed a flicker. Raising his Zeiss binoculars, he focused. His heart, accustomed to the slow rhythm of night watch, began to pound. It was not a flicker. Hundreds of ships appeared, and behind them, even more. Everywhere he looked, the gray water had become a dense mass of dark, threatening shapes. Cold dread crept up his spine. It was a sensation of confronting a problem beyond calculation. For a long moment, Richter could not process it. The scale defied reason. German intelligence had predicted a maximum of 3,000 vessels, and even that would have been extraordinary. What Richter saw was something beyond comprehension. He tried to count the vessels, but it was hopeless. His mind, on instinct, began to sort them. He could make out the massive silhouettes of battleships and cruisers. Around them swarmed smaller, faster destroyers, circling like wolves. And then there were the others, endless, uncountable others, landing craft of every shape and size, packed so tightly they seemed like iron filings drawn to a magnet. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. The view remained unchanged, only growing sharper as the sun climbed. Official records would later confirm nearly 7,000 ships from 8 nations, the largest amphibious force in history. But to Richter, it was not a statistic. It was a physical presence, bending the horizon itself, a demonstration of industrial power so vast that it rendered everything he knew about warfare obsolete. Germany had built walls of concrete. The Allies had built a bridge of steel. His hands slick with sweat, he grabbed a field telephone. "This is Richter at Observation Post 4. I have a visual on the channel. There are ships." The voice on the other end was weary, dismissive. "We have reports of a few ships. Oberleutnant. Possible raid. Stand by." "No." Richter's voice was tight with urgency. "You don't understand. It's not a few ships. It is thousands. The entire sea is covered. This is it. This is the invasion." A pause. Disbelief. Richter could almost see the man picturing him as a panicked junior officer seeing shadows. "The sea conditions are not suitable. Our reports show your observations are incorrect," the officer replied. Richter's voice cracked. "I am looking at it with my own eyes. For God's sake, look at the sea." He slammed the receiver down in frustration. It was too vast to believe. He tried another line, this time reaching regimental headquarters. "Richter here, sir. The invasion fleet is present. 10,000 ships." He knew it sounded like an exaggeration, but in that moment it felt understated. "Are you certain?" the major asked, skeptical. "The weather, clear enough to see the end of the world, sir. And it is sitting in the English Channel, requesting permission to engage." This time, urgency cut through skepticism. The chain of command had been paralyzed by a failure of imagination. Maps, intelligence reports, plans, all were being obliterated by the reality floating just a few miles offshore. While Richter watched, high command focused on reports of parachutists inland, assuming they were the main effort. No one was looking at the sea. Richter did not wait. He shouted orders to his men. Stirred by the alarm, they turned toward the water, faces etched with awe and terror. They saw what he saw. The drills were over. This was real. Heavy shells were brought up from the magazines. Rangefinders called out impossible numbers. The massive barrels, silent for so long, lifted, noses pointed toward the impossible fleet. Richter pressed his binoculars to his eyes. He watched the landing craft begin to form up, felt the low hum of thousands of engines. The air vibrated with the breath of a superpower, and he was about to throw the first stone. The order came just before 6 a.m. Engage at will. For Richter, it was a release. Disbelief shattered by the clarity of action. "Fire!" he roared into the telephone. The ground trembled as the first gun fired. Then a second, a third. Shells screamed over the water. He tracked them through his binoculars, a surge of professional pride mixing with dread. Water erupted around the fleet. A miss, then another. His men were skilled, adjusting their aim with disciplined rhythm. For a fleeting moment, they made a mark. A direct hit on an American destroyer, the USS Corey. A flash of orange, a puff of black smoke. From Richter's perspective, his guns had drawn first blood as the ship listed, crippled, later sinking. A cheer rose from the men. For a few minutes, It felt like a battle. Their training mattered. But the victory was fleeting. The fleet did not scatter. It did not falter. Gaps in the formation were simply filled. Endless lines of ships pressed forward. An iron tide beyond stopping. His guns fired again and again. For every ship they might harass, 100 passed untouched. A profound futility washed over him. He was a man with a bucket trying to empty the ocean. He looked past his impacts to the broader picture. Allied battleships, like the USS Texas, were now turning their massive 14-inch guns toward shore. Then came the reply, a low rumble from across the water, flashes of light on the horizon like a silent storm. Seconds later, the air tore apart. The ground heaved. Geysers of earth erupted from the fields. The Atlantic Wall was being dismantled with industrial precision. Where was the German response? Where were the panzers? Where was the Luftwaffe? Richter scanned the skies. Nothing. Allied planes, fighters, bombers, transports owned the air completely. German doctrine called for armored counterattacks. But the nearest armored unit, the 21st Panzer Division, was frozen by confusion and the need for direct orders from Hitler's headquarters. When it finally moved, it did so without air cover into a sky blackened with Allied fighter bombers and was destroyed before reaching the front. In that instant, with his guns firing and the sky raining steel, Richter understood. This was not a battle. It was an extermination. The Allies were not attempting to outmaneuver him. They were erasing him. That single personal realization of overwhelming force defined the entire Normandy campaign. The story of industrial power eclipsing battlefield tactics is complex and fascinating. As the naval bombardment intensified, something shifted in Richter's mind. Tactical calculations fell away, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. He no longer saw ships and soldiers. He saw the system behind them. Through trembling binoculars, he envisioned the factories. He imagined the assembly lines of Detroit, churning out trucks and engines on a scale Germany could only dream of. The logistics of sustaining hundreds of thousands of men on a hostile shore was not a miracle. It was industrial output realized. He looked to the sky, where an endless stream of C-47 transports and fighter bombers moved like clockwork. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe flew maybe 300 sorties across all of France. The Allies flew over 14,000. For every German plane in the air, there were more than 40 Allied ones. This was not a failure of courage. It was the factories. Then there were the tanks. Richter knew the reputation of the German panzers. Tigers and Panthers were technologically superior and feared by Allied crews. But that superiority was a strategic dead end. Complex, costly, slow to produce. For every Tiger off the line, the Allies were producing dozens of simpler, effective Shermans. In 1944 alone, the U.S. would make over 29,000 tanks. Germany's peak monthly production never exceeded 2,000. The Allies did not intend to win through quality. They intended to bury the panzers under a mountain of steel. This was a new reality, the industrial equation of defeat. Ideology and willpower dissolved in the face of raw numbers. Nazi propaganda promised that a unified people could triumph over decadent democracies, but ideology could not stop a bomber, and willpower could not sink a battleship. Richter felt profound, almost spiritual despair. He and his men were skilled soldiers. They were about to die not because they were outfought, but because they were outnumbered beyond comprehension. They were a finely crafted sword facing a steam-powered drop hammer. The outcome had already been decided. Propaganda posters and the belief in ultimate victory back home. Lies, not just political lies, but mathematical ones. The German High Command must have known, must have seen the production charts. Yet they sent him and millions of others to a war they could not win. It is no wonder that in the final year of the war, the psychological strain led to a surge of suicides among frontline officers. They were not only fighting Americans, British, and Canadians. They were facing the full, unrestrained power of global industry. As the sun rose, theory became reality. The naval bombardment reached a constant, rolling crescendo, shaking the concrete of Richter's bunker, sending dust raining from the ceiling. Through the observation slit, he saw the first waves of landing craft hit the shore. Higgins' boats dropped ramps, disgorging American soldiers into the surf. German pillbox machine guns opened fire, tearing into the first ranks. From his vantage point, Richter witnessed the terrible drama unfold. The water stained red, bodies piling up. The 352nd Infantry Division exacted a horrific toll. For a moment, it seemed the defense held. The Americans were pinned, but the industrial equation reasserted itself. Allied destroyers, observing the carnage, steamed boldly toward the shore, some scraping sandbars within 1,000 yards, delivering direct fire on German bunkers and turning the tide at Omaha. At the same time, strange new machines emerged. Amphibious trucks, Dukas, drove from the water onto the beach. Tanks crawled ashore, some equipped with massive flails to clear mines. Hobart's Funnies, British-engineered armor vehicles designed for just this type of obstacle. The Germans had nothing comparable. The fight on the beach shifted from desperate struggle to methodical annihilation. German strong points were systematically blinded and destroyed by naval shells, tank rounds, and bombs. On Omaha Beach alone, estimates suggest the 352nd Division suffered roughly 1,200 casualties that day, a staggering portion of its fighting force wiped out in mere hours. Richter's own battery had become a prime target. Shells landed ever closer. A direct hit on one gun pit sent a fireball roaring into the sky. Another gun was knocked out. Telephone lines went dead. He was cut off. His command fractured. He looked up one last time. The sky was a moving ceiling of Allied aircraft. On the sea, the first wave of landing craft had already been replaced by a second, then a third. Beyond them, the massive armada waited patiently, a conveyor belt of men and material that seemed endless. Around 1,500 tanks would reach the shore on D-Day alone. The battle for the beach raged on, but the outcome had already been determined. It was a matter of time and tonnage. The war in Normandy would continue for 2 more months. The hedgerow fighting would be brutal and costly, but strategically irrelevant. Every German tank destroyed left a loss that could not be replaced. Every Allied tank loss was replaced by 3 more. Every German soldier killed left a gap in the line that could not be filled. For Oberleutnant Klaus Richter and the thousands of German soldiers who survived that first day, the remainder of the war was an epilogue. They fought on, driven by duty, fear, or a patriotism detached from reality. The hope of victory, however, was gone. It had vanished in the dawn light of June 6. We often imagine the collapse of the Third Reich as a slow, agonizing process culminating in the battle for Berlin. But for the men on the Atlantic Wall, the end came in a single, horrifying moment of clarity. It arrived the moment they saw a fleet stretching to the horizon, a sky filled with enemy aircraft, and a force that was more than an army. It was the full, crushing weight of the modern industrial world. This was a new kind of war, waged not on the courage or skill of soldiers, but on assembly lines thousands of miles away. And for one German officer, peering through his binoculars at a sea that had turned to steel, it was a morning he knew it was over. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. See you in the next video.